It's Senior Bowl week. It's Curtis Patrick and Dave Caban on RotoViz Radio. We're going to break down the biggest standouts from day one and what it might mean for fantasy in 2024.
What's up, RotoViz?
Welcome into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Curtis Patrick. I'm joined by Dave Caban, who successfully broke into his own house last night. So we're talking in pre-production. Yep. Dave disassembled a door to get back in his house so he could valiantly let his wife and children sleep. Good man. That's dad mode fully unlocked there, Dave. Impressive.
Yeah. I mean, when it's 1:30 in the morning and, you've taken the dog out and you realize that you can't get back into the house, you have two options. One of which is, when you have kids that have finally managed to go to sleep, that like anything that you can do to ensure that they stay asleep and that they're not then worried about people breaking down the door into the house on a nightly basis, you try to avoid that. So you go the route of trying to then break into your own house like an idiot for like a good 45 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those scenarios where as soon as you're a dad, you get it.
Yep.
Like that you would do that. But if you're a listener and you're like, I don't have kids, like, Dave, you're crazy, man. Just ring the doorbell.
Yep.
I mean, it's a slippery slope, man. So good on you thinking about family first. Trading sleep. I mean, hopefully no like neighbors ring doorbell cameras caught you trying to break in, and
No, we're nice and secluded. we have a nice section of yard and trees between us and all neighbors, so it's probably for the best.
All right, well there we go. So another kind of rural setting, maybe not a major metro. Rural is probably not fair, but down in Mobile, Alabama this week, Dave, the Senior Bowl is going on, and the Senior Bowl has become more of a popular place in the fantasy community to do some early scouting each year, because in recent seasons we've had Cooper Kupp, who was obviously like the biggest smash out of the Super Bowl or out of the Senior Bowl ever, probably. But last year we had Puka Nacua, and then I mean, dating back decades, Aaron Donald's come out of the Senior Bowl, Phillip Rivers has come out of the Senior Bowl. It's a week where you really can add some quality to your stock, to your NFL draft stock. And this year is also kind of interesting because not only do we have some seniors, we have some older seniors. And everything that's gone on with COVID during these college careers, it's just kind of an interesting time. So you'll see lots of things on X and other social platforms of fantasy analysts and popular NFL accounts that are tracking the activities of the week. Dave and I thought we would review some of the day one standouts from Lance Zierlein and run his names through some of the RotoViz prospect tools. Because even at this early juncture, as we're starting to get our own Dynasty rookie rankings ready for 2024, it's just interesting to start looking at who are some of these sim players based off of production profiles and then things that we think to be true about player physical traits and our projected draft position. So this will be pretty fun. We're going to hit a couple players at wide receiver and then a quarterback and a running back, just to take you through the exercise of how you can use some of these scouting tools. And of course, we'll be wielding these as we do our own rankings as well. This episode is brought to you by myffpc.com. We'll be doing our Dynasty startup drafts on there pretty soon. Orphans available now, and you can play RotoViz Triflex Dynasty on that platform. That is the game that I helped the team design over there, and there's millions of dollars in play every year now. So it's the best place to play Dynasty without a doubt. We love the game. So check it out, myffpc.com. All right, Dave, let's get the pedal to the metal here. So Lance Zierlein is one of the lead NFL draft scouts for NFL.com, actually. And he and Eric Edholm will be providing some updates throughout Senior Bowl week. And I really like what they do on their free profiles that are up on NFL.com each year. They're good reference snippets if you're just trying to get it, and especially at the non-fantasy relevant positions. NFL drafts going on. I'm like, hey, who's this guard from Central Michigan that the Browns just drafted? Well, I can find out everything that I need to know on NFL.com there for free. And they do a nice job of Senior Bowl coverage too. And so we're gonna focus on their content and then make it fantasy relevant for you. So today's top start, Dave, day one, was Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of Michigan. And that pains me because I'm just barely over the Wolverines blasting the Ohio State Buckeyes this season. And a very, very tough pill for me to swallow with Michigan having all the success that it had this year. But Wilson, he was a key player in the Michigan offense, even though they were really run heavy. And so he might not stand out as much in some of the raw counting stat type analysis that's out there. People just tweeting out stat leaders and things like that. He's not going to show up on any of those lists. But he's showing up now as he matches up against these other prospects from other schools this week of the Senior Bowl. There's a lot of people noting all over social. He's like consistently open in one-on-ones. And specifically, Zerline notes that the types of windows he's creating for quarterbacks, again, this is visual, this is film-based, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It reminds him of what Tank Dell did last year. And Tank Dell kind of came out of nowhere as this little water bug player from Houston. And then at the Senior Bowl, it became very evident that no one could cover him. And he said it was that type of day for Roman Wilson. So we got to think about this. We got to listen to some of what these NFL draft scouts are saying. Dave, I want to pull up our prospect box score scout, and let's take a look at Roman Wilson. I've got some of his measurements from day one and a projected draft position, but I thought you could just review some of his key production metrics and maybe dominator, things like that. Let's just take a look at how Roman Wilson's profile shows up before we start putting in some of the variables.
Yeah, definitely. So wide receiver, Michigan 2020 to 2023. As a result of that, we have 4 seasons in here, 42 games informing the numbers that we are going to look at. I think one of the things that will stand out to you when you first look at this is his biggest season was this most recent season. His senior season had 48 receptions, 789 yards, 12 receiving touchdowns, though. So in that year, Curtis, he gets that receiving dominator of 0.38. Depending where you do some cutoffs, sometimes you're looking for 0.4, I believe. But in this case, the 0.3, reasonably close, pretty good dominator. In years prior, we'd seen him at 0.21 back in 2022 in his junior year. That year, 25 receptions, also had 25 receptions the year prior to that. And before his senior year, had put up just a total of 8 touchdowns. So as a sophomore in 12 games, 3, and then 4 as a junior. Finishes with 15.95 yards per reception. Pretty good clip for him there. In terms of career numbers, had a receiving touchdown market share of 0.29. And I actually think it's worth calling out here that his 2022 with just those 4 touchdowns doesn't sound that great, but he did account for 27% of the receiving touchdown market share. In terms of yardage, finishes with just 17%, highest amount of yardage coming in 2023 with 25%. Now, another thing that stands out to me here, Curtis, as notable when we break down his stat profile is in 2022, he actually had 2 rushing touchdowns.
Nice.
Which is nice.
We love that.
We do. We like to look for players that are able to find other ways to contribute to their team. So we will often look for ability as, kick returners, punt returners. It's nice to see receivers getting a crack at some rushing attempts too. Had 7 rushing attempts across his career at Michigan, adds those 2 2 rushing touchdowns. So that's kind of the high level breakdown there of Wilson.
All right. So while you click over on the Sims tab here, because I've got his Senior Bowl measurements. He checked in at 70 inches and 186 pounds.
Okay.
So we can go into the Sims.
Yeah, I made
stats
a
here.
boo-boo.
We made a misclick. That's fine. It's good. It's good radio. We'll go over to the Sims tab within the same tool, and once we start entering in height, weight, and draft, a projected draft capital, we can start to get a picture of the types of players that compare to him. And then let's do this from the last year active. Let's just go back to 2010. Let's not go all the way back. I want to get names that the listeners are familiar with. So for height, we don't need height for wide receiver. Actually, we need weight. So for weight, it's 186. Okay. I'm not going to try to project a 40 yet, but for draft pick, coming into the Senior Bowl, he was considered like an early day 3 guy. He's going to be a day 2 guy if he is able to keep this up. So let's be optimistic and say he has a great week, not just a great first day. Let's go with like pick 60 into the second round. So maybe somebody falls in love.
Okay,
what do we get here?
So we put those in. The tool's going to go out. It's going to look at those parameters that we just put in, as well as some key receiving metrics to find this group of similar players. Couple of fun names here. The first one being Austin Pettis, who listeners might remember out of Boise State back in 2007 to 2010. He's followed by Deontay Johnson, Vincent Brown, Chris Moore, Ryan Broyles, Kyle Phillips, Ace Sanders, Riley Ridley, John Mechie, and Jeremy Curley. So I think the most notable names there are probably Deontay Johnson and
John Mechie. I would say John Mechie.
Yeah.
He's recent with good draft capital, and the jury's still out. I mean, he's probably going to end up working out, I would think. He's got CJ Stroud back there's a signal caller, and he had dealing with cancer derailed his career early on. So the jury's still out there. So 2 hits. I mean, you reviewed the prospect profile. I mean, this is an older prospect who didn't actually really pop till a senior year. Maybe with a little bit of leading production as a junior in the 21% receiving dominator in that year. So a couple names to keep an eye on there. Once we know his 40, that will help to further refine the list. And I would say, hey, we could exclude some of the Power 5, or we could exclude the non-Power 5 conference players, but really that's only going to get rid of Deontay here and Vincent Brown. It would be interesting to see what other Power 5 players made the list after kicking those 2 out, though. So maybe let's just click and see what happens if we exclude the Power 5. Yeah,
well, it does that. One thing that is kind of interesting, Curtis, is that all the players were between like a 4.54 and a 4.6 40. So it'll be interesting to see if he ends up, in that same range. So when we pull out the non-Power 5 players, you get Chris Moore, Ryan Broyles, Kyle Phillips, Riley Ridley, Ace Sanders, John Mechie, Jeremy Curley, Josh Huff, Joe Adams, and Tony Lippett.
Okay, so it's still a bit of a questionable list. Jeremy Curley stuck around for quite a while, and Kyle Phillips has had a little bit of success, at least carving out some snap share. Yes. I'm squinting here a little bit with this list, so jury's still out. Let's see what the speed looks like for Roman Wilson, and we'll come back around. But obviously, it's great for him. He's really boosted his draft stock this week. Let's move on to the next player. We're going to stay at wide receiver here. One of the more enjoyable names to say throughout the draft evaluation process this offseason will be Lad McConkey.
Oh, and, yes. We were really enjoying this. I think it's a fantastic nickname. You said his real name, was it Andrew?
Yeah, Andrew. So okay. Andrew McConkey, his 24/7 sports prospect profile notes that Andrew McConkey is a 5'11", 158-pound wide receiver from Chatsworth, Georgia. That was his situation coming out of high school. Very, very cool to get the nickname there, and thankfully he grew some, or else we'd be talking about another Tank Dell situation here.
Yes.
But McConkey, let's see what Zierlein had to say about his day. Basically scolds people for anyone who wants to call McConkey a sleeper heading into this week. He shouldn't have been a sleeper. He should have been on everyone's radar. called him a thoughtful route runner who did a great job attacking defenses throughout the day, was creating separation constantly left and right, and made several tough catches as well. And I mean, Georgia's been in the national spotlight for a couple years. And McConkey has shown up in all of those island games that I was able to watch. Daniel Jeremiah actually, he compared Ladd McConkey to Doug Baldwin, which is a fun name. He's one of our favorites that we've talked about over the years. So let's quickly review McConkey's production, and then we'll look at some of his sims with his measurables.
Sure. So as a freshman, 15 games, 31 receptions, 447 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. From a market share perspective, those are all around like the 12 to 13% range in the majority of things that you're going to look at. Then comes in with 58 receptions in his second year at Georgia, 7 receiving touchdowns, bumps up his receiving dominator to a 0.2. And then we see him only get in 8 games in 2023, but in those 8 games, 30 receptions, puts up 15.93 yards per reception, 2 touchdowns, finishes with a receiving dominator of 0.16. And again, Curtis, we have a wide receiver contributing as a rusher, has 13 rushing attempts, 4 rushing touchdowns in his college career. So giving him some extra touches, some extra total touchdowns, finishes with 18 collegiate touchdowns, career receiving dominator of 0.16, career receiving touchdown market share of 0.16. So you're playing at a very, very competitive school, very, very competitive team. We have seen with some of these teams like Georgia, it can kind of limit the numbers that you're able to put up. I think the real interesting piece for him is going to be when we lay in, some of the age components here and run that through the search. And then, of course, I could see this being a player where, we do get some fluctuations in draft position.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing for him is he battled ankle injury this season multiple times. And so it kind of derailed him. That 2022 season, he was really, really consistent. He had 4 or more receptions in all but 3 of his 14 games, I think, that season. So he's really consistent as an outlet there. And then he had a really impressive stretch during conference play when he was healthy in 2023. 4 games in mid-October through mid-November, where he went 4 for 58 against Vanderbilt, 6 for 135 and a touchdown against Florida, 7 for 95 against Missouri, and then 481-1 against Ole Miss, as well as a rushing attempt in that game, and then battled the injury again. So he was injured at the beginning of the season, injured again later in the season, and never really got back on track. So we're going to have to remember that context, because like Wilson, he's not going to really pop just on the production. Yeah. But I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are really tooting his horn, and a lot of Ladd McConkey fans. So let's flip over to the Sims. Let's keep it at 2010. McConkey's measurements, he was 5'11" and 7/8. I believe.
Okay.
Let me go back. Nope. 5'11". He's actually 5'11".
Okay, 5'11". Yep.
5'11" weight and 187 for McConkey.
Okay.
And we're going to go day 2 here as well. We're going to go pick 50 on McConkey.
Okay. So when we first do this, we will leave in the non-Power 5 guys.
Yeah.
When we do that, his first match here, we do have John Mechie appearing again, followed by Ace Sanders, Deontay Johnson, Joe Adams, Dante Pettis, Riley Ridley, Gerald Jernigan, George Pickens, Bruce Ellington, and Josh Palmer. I think what you're seeing going on here, to some extent, is that you had guys with a day 2 kind of evaluation, but not the production that you might think you would see. And a lot of that might come from just a lower total game count. So lower overall production than you might see from some of the other players that would go in this range.
And we saw similar weights there too, with Wilson and McConkey just being a pound apart. Now, what I will say about McConkey's list, it was a little bit higher quality because we see Bruce Ellington, who was a day 2 pick. We see George Pickens, who was a day 2 pick, joining the fray. Dante Pettis was a day 2 pick. So there were some more early draft capital guys on the list, not necessarily that have all popped in the NFL, but the draft capital helps, certainly. It improves your probability of having an early career role. And now that you've thrown out the Power 5 players, there's a couple other names who had early draft capital joining the fray here too.
Hey, does anything interesting stand out to you about this list?
I mean, we've got a lot of SEC. We've got a lot of SEC. That's what's popping out to me.
Yeah, out of the 10 matches, the only one not from the SEC is Dante Pettis from Washington. Yeah. You've got 2 guys from Georgia, 2 guys from South Carolina, 2 guys from Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas. All right, so that's John Mechie, Ace Sanders, Joe Adams, Dante Pettis, Riley Ridley, George Pickens, Bruce Ellington, Josh Palmer, Lynn Bowden Jr., Kevin Norwood. Just when you read through these names, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think what it would speak to is this is a player that does have some potential to be a contributor in the NFL. Doesn't look like a star based upon these lists, but there is some potential. And, some of this is going to come down to when we're able to add in some of these other factors. And, we'll see how he finishes off the rest of the Senior Bowl week.
Yeah. You really just never know, Dave. Coming into the Senior Bowl last year, Puka Nakua's profile wasn't that dissimilar from Ladd McConkey's, and he had a great week, and the college production and the age ultimately did not matter. And so the reason that we do it the way that we do at RotoViz is as you zoom out further and further and further, we're going to be right more often than we're wrong by using a lot of these filtering processes. But that doesn't mean that they're bulletproof. They're certainly not bulletproof. They put us on the right path to make fewer mistakes as we're drafting and ranking rookies. But there's always going to be that, all right, are there enough guys that have had some of these good calls on these prospects that didn't have the production metrics or don't have an age or an athletic measurement that's really popping and causing them to stand out from the crowd? Sometimes you just give a tie break to a guy like that. So I could see McConkey getting the draft capital, maybe especially after the success of somebody like Nakua last year with a similar profile, and then getting the day 2 NFL draft capital, and then maybe he sticks in the second round, mid to late second round of rookie drafts as a result. So we'll come back around. We got months to talk about this stuff, and this is literally the first rookie episode we're talking about. And it's getting me juiced up here. So let's go over to the quarterback position. And this is a player that Dave and I had near the tippy top of our list for the quarterback prospects in last year's rookie guide that came out. And then, he decided to go back to school for, another year, a 5th season. Bo Nix out of Oregon. He went back to school and all he did was throw for 4,500 yards and 45 touchdowns, I think, Dave. So this is, this is a player coming in with tons of experience. This would be like the ultimate Bill Parcells guy, counting up the games started and the winning record and, all of those things. But I think Bo Nix, whoever was counseling him after he was done at Auburn to go into the transfer portal and, bet on himself again. What he's done in the last 2 years at Oregon, he's really boosted his stock. So let's just get it out of the way. He's going to be a day 1 pick for sure. Let's look at, and compare and contrast Auburn versus Oregon here. And then I'm really curious to see what his sims say. I'm hoping for some quality here.
Sure. So 3 seasons at Auburn between 2019 to 2021, 2 years at Oregon, 22 and 23. Obviously, what you do see is that he had over 300 attempts every year, actually had 377 attempts as a freshman, completed 58% of his passes, goes for 2,542 yards, 16 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, passing yards, adjusted passing yards per attempt were at 6.88. follows that up with a fairly similar campaign, 60% completion rate, drops down to 6.57 adjusted yards per attempt, 12-7 touchdown to interception ratio in 2020. 2021, you see pretty much the same. Curtis does bump up a little bit in terms of adjusted yards per attempt to get to 7.4, goes 11 versus 3 in that touchdown to interception ratio, passes for 2,294 yards. Then the transfer comes to Oregon, and this is where you see him getting to put on display the type of things that he's able to do. Now, there is a component we haven't got to yet, which we will, which is rushing production. But at Oregon, immediately ups his completion percentage to 72%, jumps up to 9.46 adjusted yards per attempt, which is key because those numbers before there, when you do some of the things that we do looking for quarterbacks that are more likely than others to have success, those numbers just wouldn't cut it. Getting to that 9.46 range makes a big difference. And then 29 passing touchdowns to 7 passing interceptions. Closes off his career, like you said, with a real bang, completes 77% of his passes, 4,508 yards for 11.2 adjusted yards per attempt in a 45-3 touchdown to interception ratio.
45-3. That's CJ
45-3.
Yeah, that's
that
CJ
is
Stroud-esque right there.
And the yards per attempt right there too are in a range that I start to feel good about when I look at it. Then we got to layer in the rushing production, and the rushing production, Curtis, really was there when he was at Auburn. I think it speaks to the different types of schemes that he was being placed into at these two schools. At Auburn, as a freshman, rushes for 7 touchdowns, 313 yards on 97 attempts, follows that up with 7 touchdowns and then 4 touchdowns in the 2 subsequent seasons. Going for, around like 3.5 yards per carry. At Oregon, as if he didn't make enough of a jump as a passer in his first year there, Curtis rushes 88 times, puts up 14 rushing touchdowns for 5.84 yards per carry. Then we see him in 2023, the year in which he threw for, 45 touchdowns and 4,500 passing yards, also adds 54 attempts for 4.3 yards per carry and 6 touchdowns as a rusher, bringing him to a total there of 51 touchdowns on the year. Closes his career with 113 passing touchdowns to 26 interceptions, 8.5 adjusted yards per attempt, 1,607 rushing yards, 38 rushing touchdowns. So I'm going to continue here with a couple of comments.
151 total touchdowns. I mean, that's nuts.
So there's a couple of things that you could point to here that you don't like. Obviously, you would have liked to have seen more production at Auburn, and perhaps you'd like him to have been a little bit younger. I guess the 2 comments to that would be he could have gone out last year. We would have liked him. I think you do have to take into account this big jump that you saw when he got to Oregon. Now, all of that said, we know that projecting quarterbacks in the NFL is extremely, extremely hard. One of the best things you can do is just look for overall production. Not that that is in any way a silver bullet, but it helps out a lot compared to some of the more like tangential things that you could look at. So ton of rushing production, ton of passing touchdowns. I know that when I go through and I put these through some of the things that I've done for quarterbacks, he's going to score very, very well. It's going to be interesting to see when I do those percentiles and stack him up with some of the guys we've seen in recent years, like Trevor Lawrence, like CJ Stroud, who performed very well in those things that we look at. Bo Nix could be looking pretty good. And I think it's hard to underscore just how much he improved himself from those perspectives, which definitely teams will be looking at when you see what he was able to accomplish in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much additional context to his profile too, more than we're gonna probably be able to cover in this episode. But 5 offenses, 5 years, 5 different play callers. So there's literally no continuity. But when you think about all the production, the fact that he had 61 career starts, I mean, he's coming in. He's going to be flexible, and you could argue that he would have never hit. I mean, it's hard to imagine that he's hit a top when he's never even played in an offense for more than 1 year, right? So one of the reasons he was highlighted by the NFL.com team as a standout on day one, in the first team period, he had a touchdown pass to Brennan Rice, who is actually the son of Jerry Rice from USC. So that's interesting. It was a pump and go. And then he also had a great deep connection to Penn State tight end Theo Johnson. Daniel Jeremiah's got this quarterback at 23 overall in the draft currently with room to rise. And it really just notes that learning to play from under center a bit will be an opportunity because he was primarily out of the shotgun. But I mean, Justin Herbert came out of the same, Oregon kind of high flying system. Obviously some changes with the coaching staff, but Oregon's always been kind of this high flying passing attack, and Herbert's been fine. So let's flip over to the Sims. And for Bo Nix, we're going to put him in at 74 inches and 216 pounds. Let's just go ahead. We'll use 23 overall as the draft pick. And
23?
Yeah, 23 overall.
Okay.
And let's see what we get.
When we do that, you get Kenny Pickett, Geno Smith, Andy Dalton, Clayton Tune, Drew Lock, Desmond Ridder, Teddy Bridgewater, Kevin Hogan, Kellen Mond, and Matt Corral. Before we talk about that, though, there's one thing that I want to point out here. When you look at any quarterback list, it's always just going to be littered with guys, that didn't pan out, no matter where you look at a draft, right? We see this year in and year out. A lot of the guys even taken in round one really don't pan out. So keep that in mind when you're digesting these lists.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm looking for here is, did the guys get the chance to start?
Yes.
First and foremost. And then if they did start, what did they do with the opportunity? And are we pulling up, even, putting the draft capital in, are we pulling up players that just really don't match from a draft capital perspective? Because you start to pull in too many of those players, you worry a little bit that, it's a player that scouts have fallen in love with, but it's not really justified. But, we've got Kenny Pickett in here, who has been kind of a disaster in the NFL, but did get the high draft capital. There's some similarities there with them both being older prospects. Geno Smith, I mean, he was a college stud, and I mean, it took him a while to figure it out in the NFL. Kind of wonder what would have happened if he had landed in a better system, seeing the success he had with Dave Canales in Seattle, in particular in 2022. What could have been. Andy Dalton certainly was a fantasy viable for half a dozen years, had some great seasons with Cincinnati. And, from there, the list becomes a little bit of a crapshoot. So we'll have to see. I mean, we'll have to see what type of system does Nix land in? What kind of coaching staff does he land with? I would say at this point, color me interested for super flex drafts because the rushing production's there. He's shown he can be highly accurate, and he's shown that, he can protect the ball while still pushing it down the field. So definitely going to want to do more deeper work on Nix to make sure that we get it right in super flex drafts in particular.
Sure. And I think too, if we did an exercise where you pulled best season or last season or something like that, you could also get perhaps what I would feel would be a more representative group of players or a more exciting group. And the other thing that I do think is really interesting with quarterbacks is where they actually go in a round too sometimes matters, right? Because you don't want to be too close to that top. You get drafted to these bad teams, and maybe Bryce Young's better than we got to see, and he'll, in Carolina never have a chance to show us. Who knows? So we'll stay tuned on Bo Nix.
Yeah, and then conversely, you don't want to be the guy typically that's all the way at the end of the first round because you were probably a second or third round guy that people panicked and traded up for.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
It is really interesting to watch all that unfold. Okay.
Yep.
I wanted to hit one sleep. I mean, these are all names that, people in the Devy community or people that have been watching a lot of college football, over the past couple of years. You're watching Oregon, you're watching Georgia, you're watching Michigan. We want to give you one deep player that stood out to the NFL.com team today. He's from a school that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to, I'm just pulling the trump card there to get one of the Marshall Thundering Herd into the episode here. But Rasheen Ali, running back out of Marshall. this is a pretty interesting prospect profile. He really had 2 big time standout seasons with a complicated redshirt injury / personal reason season that he didn't play very much in 2022. Yep. But Dave, take us through. Well, let me tell you what the team said here. So he flashed receiving skills in individual work, beating some of the linebackers on wheel routes, which you love to hear that. Obviously, for any running back. And they noted there's not a clear-cut front runner yet, but Ali is now firmly on the radar after his day 1 performance. Ali was quoted as saying he believes he's versatile, wants to be the 3-down big back, and they noted he could get a boost in draft capital leading up to the draft as people become more familiar with his production profile, citing over 2,500 rushing yards and 38 touchdowns in his 2 best seasons. So why don't you detail those 2 seasons in particular? We already talked about as a junior that he redshirted. So let's talk about what he did as a sophomore and a senior, and let's see what comes up. Running back's always really fun to run through the sim tools.
Yeah, definitely. So 2021 as a sophomore, 250 attempts, goes for 5.6 yards a carry. That puts him at around 1,400, has 23 rushing touchdowns, a running back dominator of 0.8. All of the market shares above 70%, which you love to see. As a receiver, actually had 45 receptions, Curtis, and a receiving touchdown. Wow. Receiving yards market share of 9%. Definitely involved in the game there. And actually, if you look at his total yards adjusted market share, he was at 30%. Touches adjusted market share was at 44%. So super involved, very productive that year, 24 total touchdowns. Fast forward to 2023, on 212 attempts, goes for 5.4 yards a carry, puts him at 1,140 yards, adds 15 rushing touchdowns. And actually in that season, his dominator numbers were even higher than they were in 2021. An RB dominator rating of 0.85, touchdown adjusted market share of 88%. Also added a receiving touchdown that year as well. 28 receptions, 213 yards, and closes with another 44% share of adjusted touches market share and 55% of the team's total touchdowns. So though his numbers dipped down on comparison to that 2021 season, from a team-wide perspective, he was actually a more substantial contributor.
Yeah, so this is kind of an off-the-radar player probably for many, but the peak production was there, and to be able to repeat it or at least approximate it a second time is great. And so this is a big opportunity for Ali. Sounds like we'll need to get the pads on and see what happens in the game. But he's on Zierlein's radar now, which is great. Let's go over to the Sims process here. Let's go with 5'11", so 71 inches and 204 pounds. And then for a draft projection, we're still going to go day 3 here, I think, unless he just absolutely goes berserk or just shows up super athletic at the combine, which can help running backs sometimes in particular. Let's go. Yeah. Did you go pick 150 there?
150. I'd gone 100. I did my math, not how I wanted to do it.
Yeah. Day 3, round 5. Let's go with that.
Yeah. All right. So pick 150. All right. Ooh, hey, a fun first name behind him. I'm sure a lot of people remember the hype surrounding Kenneth Dixon out of Louisiana Tech back in 2015, followed by Paul Perkins, Eno Benjamin, Elijah McGuire, Justin Jackson. That was a fun name I liked to say. Marcus Lattimore, Isaiah Spiller, Kyren Williams, Marlon Mack, Alexander Robinson. This is actually
a great list.
This is way more fun of a list than I was expecting we'd be able to pull here.
Yeah, great list from round 5, and you see a couple of hit. I mean, let's be real here. I mean, you get to day 3 running backs. A hit for fantasy is a player that like maybe a single RB2 season as a fantasy producer, or you could even argue that a stretch of startable games would be a hit. When you get this deep in the draft. And so Kenneth Dixon, man, the injuries just didn't. The injuries were so unkind, but it just, he was a camp hype superstar. Paul Perkins had the draft capital back in the day. Benjamin, was one of Sean and Blair's favorites for quite a while. But where we get a little bit of quality, Justin Jackson had a couple games there for the Chargers where he was able to produce. But Kyren Williams, with an overall top 5 running back season now, firmly on this list. Marlon Mack with several big time fantasy seasons to his name as well. So this is great. I mean, if you see a couple guys who really were producers for a couple seasons on day 3, and some of them even from smaller schools, I mean, Marlon Mack was what UCF maybe, or USF?
I'll put that back in. South Florida, yeah. USF, yeah.
Yep. And then, of course, Kyren Williams from Notre Dame, but, we've got Louisiana Tech on this list. We've got, Louisiana, Northwestern, and this is not exactly a list full of blue blood running back schools showing up, and yet we still get a little bit of quality. So yeah, that's kind of exciting. I think he's going to be a little bit of a sleeper we can keep an eye on here for the next few weeks, Dave, as we start to firm up some rankings.
Yeah, definitely. Really fun list. Just kind of shows the type of analysis that you can do and the fun you can have poking around in these tools. This is definitely one of my favorite ones to play with here. I can't wait till I have the chance to do the yearly exercise of collecting all of the measurables data from the combine and getting that into the Prospect Workout Explorer and everything along those lines. So, a lot of great content on the horizon.
All right, so we'll keep an eye on the Senior Bowl. We may come back and highlight a few other players as they pop throughout the week. And we'll also continue some of our rookie run it back that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks, looking at some of the 2023 rookie standouts and projecting that forward. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back later this week with some more great content.
Thank you for listening to the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. Send us questions at rvffshow@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Dave Caban FF and at CPatrickNFL. Leave us a voicemail at 978-615-9214 and make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.